Hi, everyone. Welcome to InspireSpark podcast, where we feature inspiring individuals from various fields. I'm your host, Siren. Today, our guest is Dr. Jonathan Kuek, a mental health researcher specializing in recovery approaches to the management and understanding of mental health conditions. Dr. John also serves as a research advisor for the Total Wellness Initiative, a social enterprise that aims to encourage people to be more intentional in caring for their well-being. Thank you for joining us, Dr. John.
Yeah, thanks, Siren, for the very kind invitation. I'm happy to be here to share more.
My pleasure. To start off, could you share with us a bit about your background and journey? What led you to specialize in mental health research?
Mm. So I think it really started when I was a psychology undergraduate student, and I was exploring the different fields of psychology to better see what interests me. And one thing that I noticed was really a lack of Asian-centric psychological research, and more specifically within the context of mental health issues. And that really sparked my interest in, creating mental health research that was not only adapted, but really from the insider perspective. And hopefully through my journey as a mental health researcher, I will be able to do this to create more Asian-centric information that isn't purely taken from a Western perspective and then changed to fit within the Asian context, but to really develop from the ground up Asian-oriented theories of mental health issues.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Your commitment to developing Asian-centric approaches to mental health research is inspiring, and I'm eager to see how your work continues to contribute to this important field. Let's talk about exploring holistic wellness. You are deeply involved with the Total Wellness Initiative Singapore, promoting holistic wellness. Could you share with us what holistic wellness means to you and why you believe it's crucial for mental health?
I think it's important to recognize that wellness isn't kind of like a one-size-fits-all construct, and everyone will have their own definition of what wellness means to them. But at Total Wellness, what we have done is basically to create a 10-dimensional perspective of wellness. So you have your 10 dimensions, things like physical, psychological, social, occupational, even things like financial, creative, digital wellness, something that's a bit newer. You also have things like environmental and spiritual wellness, which are things that are a bit more not so mainstream, but we believe are important to discuss. So this idea with having multiple domains of wellness or dimensions of wellness is really so that people can best encapsulate what wellness means to them for themselves, and from there work on improving their own wellness and well-being.
Yep. Wow, the 10 dimensions are indeed a comprehensive approach to looking at wellness. And it's really important to be intentional in focusing on the dimensions that are relevant to an individual's current needs.
Yep.
As a passionate mental health researcher, you delve into various aspects of mental health. Could you highlight a recent study or finding that you believe has significant implications for how we understand mental health and recovery?
Yeah, for sure. I think there is so much research out there these days in terms of mental health. And I think even in Asian countries, we are starting to develop a lot more mental health research, which is definitely a good thing because it all contributes to a more holistic understanding of mental health issues. But I think one study or one review paper more specifically that really stood out to me within the past few years was this umbrella review, which was conducted on the serotonin theory of depression. So this serotonin theory of depression is currently the main way that we understand and conceptualize why depression occurs or what occurs when depression happens. And the idea is that, we have reduced serotonin in our mind, and that is the main cause of why you see the depressive oriented symptoms. So what this umbrella review found is that, they took a look at the past 2 decades or 3 decades worth of research and really synthesized a lot of other review papers that have evaluated the role of serotonin within the context of depression. And one surprising thing was that they didn't really find any substantiated evidence for its role. And I think that is really starting to redefine the way that we may need to evaluate this idea of how important the neurochemistry of our minds actually contribute to things like mental health conditions, things like depression. And while depression is the first one to be carefully examined this way, I believe, in the coming years, we may see other conditions, schizophrenia, anxiety issues, all these start coming up in terms of having papers that stick to evaluate some of their biological or biochemical kind of explanations to really start understanding whether the best way for supporting people with these conditions is just to prescribe them medication, which in most parts of Asia, that seems to be the predominant approach at the
Yes.
moment.
Wow, that's a thought-provoking review, John. It could have profound implications for how we understand and treat mental health conditions. Your interests extend to clinical ethics in the context of mental health. How do ethical considerations shape the treatment and support provided to individuals experiencing mental health challenges?
Mm. So I think that's a very interesting question because oftentimes when we think about clinical practice, we think about um, how good an individual's match with their clinician is. And a lot of times, it really starts with proper training. And proper training will help to reduce the gap between the clinician and their client. But at the same time, ethical issues such as the lack of regulation do hinder our ability to ensure that all the clinicians out there are held to a certain standard. While there is an argument that there are some roles which don't require such extensive training, but I think by and large, as long as you're working with people experiencing various mental health conditions, then a bare minimum quality and also a certain level of training is necessary in order to provide good quality services. So ethical frameworks, a lot of people view them as ways to gatekeep or ways to avoid having people join the profession or make it more difficult for people who may want to support other people. And definitely there is an argument for how these professionals are selected and trained subsequently. But at the same time, simply having no regulations at all is not a good thing. Like in Singapore, I often advocate for a greater need for these regulations for things like licensing procedures, things like training and competency frameworks that are more accurately regulated. So you can have training and competency frameworks, and NCSS has created some in the past for the social service sector. And I think they're even working on one that's coming out soon, I think, as well, for a national competency framework. But the point is that, if you don't have regulations, you don't have legislation backing these regulations, then even if people do not follow it, which, some people may actually do so within the private sector where the government's reach isn't as far, then you still create the potential for exploitation. And people in Singapore, they generally don't have a very high level of literacy regarding help-seeking avenues. And I think that's why we need to have these regulations in place. So I kind of always liken it to, if you go to see a medical doctor, would you want to see someone who has completed, maybe half a year of training, or who have just taken a first aid course, for example? And oftentimes, the argument is always that, doctors handle a bit more severe cases, and that's why they need stringent licensing and all that. But I don't think that's necessarily true because, the damage that can be done by untrained or unethical mental professionals can stay with an individual and may not even be very apparent until years down the line when they start to take a toll on an individual's mental health.
Yeah, definitely agree with you because considering that the client's mental health and safety are in their hands, right, it's very important to have regulations, licensing, and setting standards.
Yep.
Your mission is to encourage people to be more proactive towards their wellness and well-being. What are some practical steps individuals can take to proactively maintain their mental health, especially in today's fast-paced and stressful world?
So I think it really starts with being aware. So the first step to any behavioral change is always that awareness that will help us to understand where we currently stand and if we think that something needs to change. But most of the time, and I often do this whenever I give my wellness talks, is that I find that people tend to live on an autopilot mode. So what this means is that they just go through life every day, and oftentimes the longer they have been in their routine, they stop really actively considering what can be improved on, or what may not be so good for them. And that's where the intentionality and the self-awareness really comes in. By being aware, then we can use frameworks such as the 10 dimensions of wellness to be able to start evaluating where we actually stand regarding our wellness. But it really starts with that level of awareness and then following up, intentionally seeking out answers as to where we are in relation to our wellness. Then you can take steps to identify, what are some of the barriers I'm currently exposed to? What are some of the challenges I'm facing in relation to really securing my wellness? What am I not doing, or what am I doing that may be hindering my progress towards my self-care goals? Or what are some of the environmental factors that I can afford to shift? And how can I then break them down into small little steps that I can take in order to change the way that my current situation is like? So for example, with physical health, there are very easy ways you can stack your habits. So one habit that I often like to talk about is really this idea of increasing movement, which is something that a lot of doctors often recommend. And how can you increase movement in a very convenient manner? So in the past, when I was trying to incorporate more movement into my life, what I would do is, whenever I would go to office, and whenever I needed to maybe move around the office, I would take a slightly longer route just to add that additional more steps, a few more steps to my route. And sometimes I will even go a bigger detour in order to add even more steps. And over time, I think all these steps do add up to your daily life. And at one point in time, I was quite regularly clocking in about 10,000 steps a day, even just by walking around the office and walking around the campus. Yeah, so I think it's really finding little ways like this to incorporate the changes that you want to see.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I also do that. It's like I will walk home instead of taking bus home. And then I'll climb the stairs instead of taking lift. So yeah, I really agree with you that it's really about being aware, right, of where you are currently and where you want to get to in terms of your wellness. And with your involvement in youth mentorship and volunteering, could you speak to the unique challenges young people face regarding mental health today? And how can we better support the mental well-being of the next generation?
Okay. So I think one of the biggest challenges that youths really face is this very uncertain environment that a lot of them are growing up in, especially people who had their formative years within the COVID pandemic. So, a lot of young people who rely on social interactions to develop were not able to get that social interaction. And there is just very little substitute, even if you use the online mediums like what we're doing now, for that kind of social interaction. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that, we also have an epidemic of sorts of loneliness within the different genders, and also within young people at large. And a lot part of it is really the digitalization of the world. Everything is so fast, everything is so online and perpetually online. It feels like, we have that tendency to compare with other people. We have that tendency to maybe, even though we have a good thing happening for us, we start to think that, what we have is less attractive, simply because we see what other people are doing online, and we don't see, the kind of downsides that they may be facing as well, which kind of leads to that uncertainty, things like, am I doing life right, for example? Am I perhaps not doing things the right way? And even I really experienced a lot of struggle with this, and especially in deciding the kind of pathway that I wanted to go down, in terms of being a mental health researcher who is working as an ad hoc lecturer, ad hoc academic, instead of just simply signing on to a university and going the traditional research pathways, which will allow me to do research for sure, but at the same time, it wouldn't really allow me to do research that I felt personally passionate about, because there are academic issues there that reward certain types of research over others. And this uncertainty, constantly eats away at you slowly. You don't really recognize it, you don't realize it until over time you start wondering why you're so tired. You know, your mind is constantly drifting to these kind of thoughts whenever it's the for example, the times before you sleep, or when your mind is trying to be quiet, and then you start having some of these more intrusive oriented thoughts. Yeah, but I think that's one of the biggest issues with the younger generation, is that, there's simply too much uncertainty. The world is very chaotic these days. We have wars going on. There's so much conflict, and they are, they see it all. They see it all. So with social media, you can't hide anything. And it's always online, and they are digital natives. They are perpetually online. And I think when we are trying to address that, we don't really actually understand how much damage this does. So we know it's bad, but we don't know how bad it is, and how to really intervene accurately or effectively, especially because you can't simply tell a teenager, look, everyone is online, so you need to stop comparing with yourself with other people online. It's easy to say, but translating that into really getting them to feel that sense of gratitude for what they have, helping them to see that, you have to craft your own path, and that, there is no one right way to success, which I think there are definitely stories out there of youths doing that. But for the most part, when I speak to my students, when I talk to, the people that I mentor, oftentimes they are still boxed into a very certain perspective relating to what success entails. And oftentimes that can be detrimental to their mental health if they are struggling to meet where they believe they need to go versus where they are now, and the many layers of barriers therein.
Yeah, I mean, your point resonates with me. It's like about the expectations, right? Societal expectations versus their own expectations, what does success mean to them? And that's why it's so important to equip them to build resilience, to help them navigate the complexities they face and thrive in this rapidly changing environment. Yeah. As we come close to the session, is there any final message you would like to share with our listeners?
Well, I think it's important that, we all recognize that struggles are going to always be present in life. And sometimes we have to just grit our teeth and push through it. And other times, there may be ways to get around it. But ultimately, by being more proactive with our own well-being, we will hopefully be able to circumvent or mitigate some of the impacts of these struggles by catching them as early as possible. So we in mental health, we always emphasize the importance of early intervention. And it's not to say that early intervention means that, things will magically become better, but it means that we have a better chance of being able to solve or be able to reduce the potential backlash later on. And I think that it's so understated, and oftentimes, there's this saying that, if you don't take care of your body, eventually, you'll be forced to do so. And the same goes for your mental health as well, whereby, if you don't take care of your mental health, while that's not to say that meeting setbacks, learning how to adapt is not a good thing, but when too much of it comes all at once and you aren't able to actively bounce back and build that resilience over time, it can have a very strong impact on our psyche in the long term.
That's definitely, correct. And I really believe in prioritizing self-care and seek support when needed. It's really okay to feel not okay, and then really seek support. Don't have to feel shy about it, or really feel that it's like you're showing vulnerability. It's actually a strength. All right, great. Thanks, Dr. John, for your time and invaluable sharing to our listeners. Thank you for joining us. Remember, mental health is critical to our well-being and success. Do prioritize your mental well-being and take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Siren.